Our speaker today is Randine Lewis. She's an author. She's well known for her teaching and treating infertility. Her first book was The Infertility Cure. And now she's gone to the other end of the spectrum on Daoist Death Medicine. And as we mentioned, she has a mentorship available as well. And I feel grateful that I consider Randine's obviously a colleague, but she's been my mentor when it came to fertility, and now through the Daoist Death Medicine mentorship, that as well. And I'm happy to call her a friend. Lastly, I want to remind you that this is for educational purposes only. It's not intended to be medical advice. Do not perceive it as medical advice. If you have a health condition, please do seek out a qualified healthcare provider. And by watching this course, it does not give you the scope to practice Chinese medicine. Where you live, that jurisdiction determines whether you have the scope to practice Chinese medicine or not. And with that, I will say, Randine, please share your wisdom today. To my friends and colleagues online today, please post your questions, your comments, and I'm happy to moderate those for Randine.
Thank you, Lauren. Appreciate that. Also, just like to extend my thanks to Healthy Seminars. You've done such a wonderful job of helping to get these things out there in a really smooth fashion. So, and thank you all for being here. Yeah, the mentorship filled up quickly. So if you still have interest, there's still a possibility of getting in this year, as Lauren said. So today we're going to talk about, the death canal as transformation. So we usually think of this subject as somewhat daunting, as something that, do I even want to go into it? But imagine befriending death so fully that you can meet it without fear and really allow its teachings to transform the way that you live, the way that you heal, the way that you practice medicine. This is not just learning how to treat people that are dying. It includes that, though. So if you can kind of reframe death, not as a failure or as an ending, but really as a quiet reward, in fact, for a life well lived. So we live in a time where so much is asking to die, that we are relentlessly young, forward driving, productive, stimulated, awake, yet we're increasingly unable to rest, to descend, to release, to let go. We've forgotten how to sleep. We've forgotten how to soften, how to die to the frenzy of a world that never pauses. So death is the ultimate yin. It's a resting so complete, so intimate with mystery, that transformation or alchemy is its only possible outcome. Because we know that energy doesn't die, it transforms. So in this mentorship, we will be going through the soul's process of transformation, and it'll be guided by the 7 gates of the death canal, the 5 elements, and the 3 treasures. And then we'll follow the natural alchemy of life. As Jing refines into Qi, Qi clarifies into Shen, and then consciousness ultimately returns to the source. So this is not only a way of dying, it's a way of living in alignment with the Tao. So that when death arrives, it's not met with fear or resistance, but with presence, coherence, and grace. And if we can meet death with that, we can meet anything with that. So the primary aim of this course is to gently guide us beyond the veil of conditioned perception, beyond our habitual fear, our fixed identities, and the impulse to control life, so that the eternal may be recognized beneath or beyond the movements of birth and death. There's something beyond birth and death. So as we kind of clarify our perception, death is no longer experienced as something that merely happened to us. It becomes a teacher. It reveals what has always been present, patiently awaiting the recognition that we're going to give it. So this work invites us to stop rushing toward the next moment, the next solution, the next fix, the next heal, the next tomorrow, and instead learn to pause within the liminal space that is so potent. All of the healing actually comes from that. It's the space before becoming that allows all becoming, where nothing is required and everything's already available to you. So, as Rumi observed here, your old life was a frantic running from silence. And so sometimes life seeks our attention by forcibly slowing us down through illness, through loss, or catastrophe. In fact, the word disaster originally meant to be disastral, to be cut off from the stars, to lose our orientation within the greater cosmos. So kind of seen in this way, death is not merely about the physical act of dying. It's about reestablishing our relationship with the heavens, releasing all that's not eternal, and returning what never truly belonged to us, our false self, our make-believe identities, back to the Tao. So death brings us face to face with the essential questions that we so often postpone. And, when you work in this field and somebody ends up like, I've never looked at these questions, I've never slowed down enough to ask the important questions. And so we're going to look at these, like, who am I really? Beyond my roles, my identities, and my stories about who I think I am, my made-up self. And why am I here? Where did I come from? Where am I going? And one of the most common regrets at the end of life is people arrive saying, I never knew how to be authentic, never really knew who I was. So have I lived an authentic life, faithful to who I really am? And then what am I willing to give to follow that path, which is the Taoist path anyway? So when these questions are met honestly, death ceases to be a disaster. It becomes a realignment, a remembering of our place among the stars. And it gives us a renewed capacity to follow their guidance. So once we've prepared for death, which we'll spend a lot of time in preparation, and reestablished our orientation within the greater cosmos, the dying process reveals itself through these three natural movements of separation, transition, and deliverance. And so these movements correspond to the three treasures and how we have used our Jing, Qi, and Shen. So separation is the release of Jing, when we release our substance, our history, and our inherited form, as the body returns to the earth from which it arose. But what we've done with what we are given in life is what survives. It's what goes on to the transition stage. And transition is the actual movement of qi, a liminal passage through the unknown that we haven't met before, where states of awareness shift and our fixed identity that we've known ourselves to be actually becomes more porous. And then deliverance is the liberation of Shen, consciousness totally freed from its earthly vessel, returning to clarity, light, continuity. So seen in this way, dying is not a collapse, but it's a refinement. Jing dissolving into Qi, Qi clarifying into Shen, until only what's essential remains. And that's the way that we are instructed is the correct way to live, to follow the Tao, redeem Shen from Jing. And preparation is key. David Kessler, who's a leading voice in grief and end-of-life care, observes that in our culture, we often plan more carefully for a weekend getaway than for our own deaths. You know, we create detailed business plans, we create detailed birth plans, yet when it comes to dying, the most certain thing, our wishes, our values, and beliefs are rarely spoken aloud and even more rarely honored, which I think is an absolute tragedy. So without preparation, death is left to chance, to circumstance, and institutional default. 70% of people say they don't want to die in a hospital, they don't want to die in an institution, and yet 70% do. And so there's something wrong with this. So with preparation, this can become a conscious passage, one that's shaped by intent, by clarity, and by care. So, but this is a different type of preparation. It's not merely logistical or legal. It's an inner readiness, kind of an education of the heart and spirit, one that includes learning how to befriend the mystery rather than resist it. So, yes, we have to attend to practical matters, legal documents, medical directives, but alongside of those, we must stop avoiding the idea, the discussions, death itself, and instead allow it to become a teacher. Not everyone is granted the time, the clarity, or the circumstances to prepare when death arrives. It's a real luxury, but if everybody does it before the end, then it's not a luxury. It's just something that you do. And for this reason, you know, we begin the work now while life is still intact, while awareness can be cultivated deliberately rather than being forced by some sort of crisis. And many wisdom traditions express this truth with striking simplicity. Die before you die, so that when you die, you won't die. So when we encounter the unknown, when we peer into the void, there's often a reflexive tightening, a surge of panic, a wish to turn away. But our preparation invites a different response. It asks us to stay present at the edge of not knowing. And boy, that is a potent place to live, at the edge of not knowing. I encourage students to be in that place with their patients, to be at the edge of not knowing. You know, don't solidify them into a diagnosis too soon. Open it up. Stay in that not knowing space where your presence is doing the healing before you even take a pulse, before you even put a needle in. Stay in that mystery. Stay in the liminal where all things are accomplished. So to prepare for death is to loosen our identification with what is temporary, to live with greater honesty and coherence, and to rehearse surrender long before the final moment arrives. In doing so, death becomes less a rupture and more a return, like, oh, I've been through this before. I've done this before. It's a remembering. So the spirits of the five elements, they're not only active in shaping the quality of our lives here and now, but the way we relate to them also determines their alignment during the dying process. So at death, the Shen, the Yi, and the Zhi, aligned vertically here, they gather along this axis, you know, between heaven and earth. And that is our, you know, our awareness, our consciousness, our will or our intention. And then, the jur, our very purpose, our reason for being. So the Po actually release downward, and they of course return to the earth, while the Hun follow the Shen upward toward the eternal realms. And so this is natural choreography of departure that's written into the body-soul continuum itself. But this alignment is to be lived now, ongoing, day to day. It's not to be discovered for the very first time at the end of life. So Taoist practices teach us to live this orientation now, to cultivate this vertical coherence, to soften the Po's attachment to form, and to allow the Hun to turn toward what is timeless, even while we remain embodied. And in doing so, we learn to inhabit the same posture in life that will one day carry us through death. And I know a lot of people ask, isn't this kind of morbid? Isn't this like avoiding life? And it's like, no, it's quite the opposite. It's the exact opposite. It's when we're avoiding death that we're not living fully. So, when we live this way, death doesn't introduce something unfamiliar. It completes a movement that we've already begun. We already know it. We already live it. It's just a continuation of that. Unfortunately, modern life is mostly lived along a horizontal plane, oriented toward the fulfillment of desire. Things of the world are going to satisfy me, and the avoidance of discomfort. I don't want to feel bad. I don't want to feel this way. And, we can perpetuate that for people too. That we can feed that sense with our patients that no, you don't ever have to feel bad. You just come in here and we'll fix you up and you'll feel better all the time. And while definitely we have to do that sometimes, we have become rather insensitive. We don't know how to be with discomfort. We don't know how to be with things that are not what we desire. And so we tend to push them down. We tend to banish them to the unconscious. Like, I'm not dealing with that. And we reject a large portion of ourselves. Excuse me. So this is a condition of misalignment as far as the Tao is concerned, where consciousness becomes tethered to comfort, acquisition, a solidified identity in the world, and sensory reinforcement that really binds us to this three-dimensional existence and perpetuates the cycle of repetition. Birth, striving, loss, return. Birth, striving, loss, return. But there is something beyond that. And, we get into that quite deeply in this mentorship. So when life unfolds only in this horizontal way, which it does for 99.9% of the population, the vertical axis is forgotten. The spirit can't rise. The Po cling to form and the Hun remain entangled in unfinished longing, circling what has not yet been resolved here. I have 7 arrows of the Po here because there are 7 Po. And those Po are often the things that we tend to not like about ourselves. So we suppress them beneath consciousness. And then there are 3 Hun, and those 3 Hun are supposed to be following the Shen, toward the midline, instead of toward worldly desires. So we want to kind of turn this around so that we live a life of completion, so that we recognize, honor, and learn the lessons that come from the embodiment of the Po in this life. And then through interacting with the Hun and the other elements, we can rise above them. I know there's a lot going on here in this slide, but So according to the Jing, human life is meant to unfold over a full century. And so from birth to death, we ascend from the density of pure Jing toward the clarity of pure Shen, gradually cultivating spirit by redeeming Shen from Jing through the medium of Qi. And this maturation depends on an ongoing living relationship between the Hun and the Po that's mediated by the Yi, which bridges the conscious and the unconscious mind. You know, it's surprising how much that has been held at bay in the subconscious tends to seep out of the crevices as the, Qi and blood and Jing diminish toward the end of life. And so the more that we can deal with our stuff now while we have our faculties, the more we'll be able to depart consciously. So the Po gather experience through embodiment, through sensation, emotion, memory, and the instinct to survive. And the Hun engage that experience, lifting it into meaning, narrative, and direction. And through this continual dialogue, life isn't merely endured as a function of time and how much we accumulate, but how much we've digested, integrated, learned in this curriculum of life in our mandate from heaven. So experience is transformed, and over time, our very living ripens into wisdom. And then the Yi provides the grounding center that integrates body and spirit into the coherent whole that we are meant to be as we depart this earthly existence. So when this relationship becomes distorted, when aspects of ourselves are rejected or disowned, then we accumulate their toxicity without integrating them. Memories stagnate, emotional material hardens. We never get over our unfinished business, and it begins to haunt the psyche. And gradually our fragmentation takes root, affecting not only the quality of life, but eventually the coherence of the dying process itself. And these are the things that cause chronic disease in the first place. So when we're really working this deep in it, we're learning to stay well by learning to die well. So to live consciously, fully consciously, is to allow the Hun to remain in continual conversation with the Po, with our subconscious, with that which we've pushed away. That translates our life experience into understanding, into compassion, into forgiveness, into love, so that nothing essential is left behind when the time comes to depart. So we will go through each of the 10 aspects of the prenatal souls, the 3 Hun and the 7 Po, that participate in orienting consciousness, allowing awareness to rise toward the clarity of pure Shen. So at the moment of death, these same forces that converge, the Po releases downward, returning to the substance of lived experience to the earth. And then the Hun gather upward, following the Shen toward the eternal realms. And so this convergence is not negotiable. What you have not finished in this life, what you have bypassed in this life, it will continue. It will go on until it's digested and transformed. But when it has been integrated over a lifetime of conscious awareness, it allows for an ease of release. So all that has been avoided, our unresolved conflicts, our unassimilated experiences, hidden or denied material rises into awareness, and it demands recognition. And I think that our modern society really lets us down here. That oh, I've got too much trauma, I've got too much of this, give me something so that I don't have to feel it. And the Taoists are wake up, you were given what you were given. What are you going to do with what you were given? How are you going to live it? How are you going to transform it so that it can be something that transforms you into the absolute best version that you could possibly be? And you leave a life saying, I did it all. I did it all. I did everything that I was supposed to do. And that's the wholeness that we're invited into, that makes our passage out of here one of celebration, a life well lived. And this is my reward. I get to go into the great unknown. So for this reason, vertical alignment is not an 11th hour task. It's a way of living that prepares the soul for its freedom. And this way of living allows us to live as the soul. Wasn't it La in the 14th century? My teacher told me one thing: live in the soul. And when that was so, I began to go naked and dance, something like that. so here we come to recognize what has always been true, what has always been begging for recognition, that our essential nature is not bound to the body, to the personality, or to the narrative of a single lifetime. It is continuous, it is eternal, and it's usually beyond anything that we could think. So, kind of going over what the process is here, that we clear the core energies first. And, at the first gate, we are asked to fast from our mental identity, to discover who we are beyond the mind and its stories. And, in the natural dying process, one of the earliest shifts that tells caregivers that the individual is moving toward the death canal, it's loss of appetite. The body is no longer reaching outward for nourishment, and it begins to kind of turn inward. And so at this gate, the first gate, we practice a similar turning, not of the body, but of consciousness itself. And here, we begin to lose our appetite for things of the external world. And a lot of you know when that happens. Like, the things that used to do it for me just aren't any longer. But we begin to lose our appetite for some of the things that the world is engaged in: compulsive thinking, for borrowed narratives, for false identities, for trying to, scramble to the top by being polar, hating our neighbor, hating our brother, hating the opposite political party, whatever it is. We've had enough of this. And we long for something that's more true. We long for something that's more in alignment with our true nature. And we start to see how thoroughly the mind has been populated by our unexamined beliefs and inherited ideas. And so as this appetite fades, something essential is revealed. Oops. I think I was a slide behind here. So what remains when we have cleared out what is beyond my mind-made self, what remains is not just emptiness, not just this black, dark nothingness, but we have to touch into that emptiness so that a clarity, a quieter intelligence that does not rely on thought is allowed to exist. And so this is the first act of preparation, learning to release what no longer nourishes our souls, long before the body itself must go. And so the second gate invites us to meet our fears directly, not by suppressing them, but by entering in with honesty and courage, especially our most fundamental fear, the fear of death, that's behind a tremendous amount of our anxieties, but we don't think so. It's like it's because of this, it's because of this, it's because I don't have enough money, it's because I'm not going to have enough, whatever. But underneath all of that is survival of the body and fear of death. So we will look at how death, which was once a very compassionate presence, it came to be cast as an enemy, and what was lost when our reverence for this passageway gave way to fear. And we will look at our own fears that agitate the spirit. So this gate is governed by Zhi, the water spirit, housed in the kidneys, rooted in the ancestral current that carried us into being. So Zhi holds the thread of identity that persists beyond circumstance and beyond the body itself. Now, Zhi survives, but the body doesn't. So as this energy matures, we're able to examine our life purpose, the things associated with the water element without illusion, and loosen the fear that binds our identity solely to bodily survival and physical form. And so the fruit of this work is wisdom, not as like a belief or a philosophy, but as our own embodied knowing that comes from the cosmos within, the eternal within me. That's what wisdom is. I have access to the universal intelligence when I've been cleared of my own toxic debris. And we begin to sense ourselves as something continuous rather than conditional, something drawn from a lineage that's beyond our familial line alone, deeper than flesh or fear of its demise. And so this is the gift of the Watergate, the recognition that what we truly are is not threatened by death. And from this recognition arises a steadier way of living, one that's grounded in humility, depth, and trust that allows us to rest more fully in life because we no longer need to cling to form. And then having learned through the second gate that our deepest identity is not bound to the body, we're no longer driven by fear of loss. And so from the steadiness in the Zhi, the work naturally rises into the third gate, which is the realm of fire. And the third gate invites us to examine our emotional attachments, the bonds, the longings, the aversions that tethers the heart to people, to outcomes, to issues, to identity. And as these attachments are brought into awareness, they begin to loosen. It's not that we lose our ability to respond fully emotionally. To be able to respond fully emotionally is a beautiful human capacity. But when we're locked into the emotional identity, it is not pretty. It's not lovely anymore. So what is revealed beneath them is the innate purity of the unconditional heart. Our true nature, a presence that neither grasps nor withholds. It's in pure relationship first with itself and then with others, but without grabbing that I need you to make me whole. I need this to be a certain way so that I don't feel what's uncomfortable to me. And so resting in this openness of Shen, the Shen naturally homes to the peace of a quiet heart. It settles. Emotion is no longer something that we're caught within, but something that we can witness, that we can refine. And in this resting, the heart becomes clear, spacious, and luminous. And so that's the gift of the fire gate, a return to a heart that loves without attachment and a spirit that abides in ease. And so peering into death then becomes a practice. It's a philosophy of preparation that's worthy of an entire lifetime, one that gradually reveals what must fall away and what endures. And as this understanding deepens, death is no longer approached as an abstraction, but as a familiar movement that's woven into the very fabric of living. So at the time of death, the Po release, they return to the earth with the body, offering back the substance of a life fully lived. And the Hun lift effortlessly from form, carrying the distilled meaning of that life, and follow the Shen beyond the body and into continuity, into the collective. And when this truth is understood and lived, death is no longer an interruption, it's a completion, a return to what has always been present, quietly waiting to be remembered. So within the mentorship, we engage in a deliberate review of the life narrative, the stories, patterns, identities that have shaped and at times bound us. Here, viewed through the lens of the 9 heart palaces and the symbolic inner landscape of the Neijing tomb. And so this work invites a compassionate life review, not as a reckoning or a judgment of the past, but as an act of release and a reclamation of the soul. What no longer serves the progress, the advancements of my soul is laid down, and what carries meaning is gathered and honored. And in this way, coherence is gradually restored on the journey of our soul. And through this process, experience is integrated, the attachments soften, and the inner terrain becomes intelligible, navigable, preparing both life and death to be met with clarity, continuity, and grace. We practice the art of the heart, a disciplined yet gentle inquiry that reveals the single current beneath all experience. And through this practice, we begin to recognize an eternal identity that's not formed by emotion, story, external meaning, physical shape, yet quietly animates them all. The heart becomes a place of seeing rather than grasping, of knowing rather than reacting. And boy, we need more of that in the world. So as the heart clarifies, all of this multiplicity, all of this confusion naturally resolves into unity. And what remains is not an idea or belief, but a simple, luminous knowing of who we truly are. So when we contemplate the purpose of our sacred lives, death no longer appears as an ending, but a sacred passage woven into life itself. Being present with death begins by being fully present with oneself. We must come to know ourselves honestly and tend to our inner conflicts so that our thoughts, beliefs, emotions, and judgments can be laid down at the threshold. We bring no interference with us. And only then can we be truly present with another, like a hollow bone that's open, that's unobstructed, emptied of past and future, fear and hope, expectation and agenda. And there is nothing more sacred and real. We become channels for something unspeakably holy. And this is not something that should be reserved for the end of life. That all of life, every patient encounter, we should meet from this same place of unspeakable holiness. That is what our medicine has called us into. Few have responded. So we will carefully explore the signs of symptoms at the end of life, along with the diagnostic tools of Chinese medicine that allow us to recognize and interpret them with discernment. So it includes understanding the body's natural withdrawal, the movement of the spirits, and the subtle cues that inform appropriate care, timing, and presence at the threshold of death. We'll learn pulse taking. We'll learn to recognize what stage they're at. So we'll work with alchemical acupuncture, moxibustion, acupressure, herbs, and essential oils to support transcendence and compassionate relief of symptoms, while learning specific techniques that assist the soul through its transition and ascension. So these practices are not applied to prolong life at all costs, like happens when you're with somebody who's dying in a hospital, but to preserve coherence, awareness, and dignity at the end of life. That this is a way of tending to the soul and using the embodied collection of meridian systems to help facilitate the soul on its journey onward, to help release it from its unfinished longings, to help the soul depart in peace. There is nothing medical about dying, according to B.J. Miller, who's the death specialist at the Zen Hospice. So it is seen and said as a sacred transition. And that's how it should be held. So we'll explore how Chinese medicine can help restore dignity to the dying process, returning agency from institutional default to the authority of the one who is passing. This includes bringing forward essential questions that are too often left unspoken. And, we begin by asking these of ourselves. How important is it for you to remain conscious at the end of life? And for one who's on the spiritual path, it is pretty important. And one that's only superficially on the path, it's like, nah, knock me out. I don't want to feel anything. And finding out, what, I don't mean to be judgmental in that, because a lot of people do just knock me out. I can't take it. But it does, that kind of approach will determine where they go next, what happens next, because it is a factor in the vibration that they will experience as they leave this three-dimensional world. And it's that vibration that determines where they go next. So the important questions is, how important is it for you to remain conscious at the end of life? What forms of pain and anxiety relief do you wish to receive? And which do you wish to decline? That's really important, because oftentimes they give them to the hospice patients without their consent. As soon as you sign the form that says, I wish comfort care, then they determine what you get, how much, and when. So by opening these conversations, Chinese medicine becomes more than a modality of care. It becomes a means of honoring choice, presence, and personal sovereignty at the threshold of death. And we'll go through the consequences of each of the most common end-of-life pharmaceuticals that are automatically given, and see their effects not only on the body, mind, but on the passage of the soul. So there are many ways to die, many places in which death may occur. And, each of us carries choices about the settings, the rituals that hold us, who or what will be present as we make our transition. And while not all deaths unfold according to our wishes, these choices can help shape the final container through which the soul departs, if circumstances allow. If circumstances do not allow, say one, dies in a sudden accident, they still have been able to state, this is important to me. And the loved ones still gather around and do that. A good friend of mine lost her best friend just a couple of weeks ago. And the care of his dead body, the care of his rituals after death, they already knew what he wanted, and his end of life celebration and send off was incredible. It's one of the most beautiful events I had ever witnessed. So, in the presence of somebody who's dying, time slows down, and we're asked to slow down with them until striving ceases. We're not trying to get any particular outcome, and it's so potent to be in that place. And we can come to rest together, becoming quiet beacons of peace. And so when death is approached this way with intention, the environment itself becomes an ally, supporting coherence, calm, and a meaningful crossing. And while the Hun and Po separate, the process is not yet complete. For a time after death, the body continues to function as a kind of gravitational homing field for the soul, a residual matrix of attachment, memory, and orientation. And it's important for the soul to be able to come back. And that's one of the reasons that in the Daoist and a lot of Eastern practices, you leave the body undisturbed. Whereas at the hospital now, it's like, okay, last breath, get them down to the morgue. And so we want to change that. We want to allow people that this is what I want. And legally it can be done. So because of this, great reverence and attentive presence are required even after the body has ceased breathing, even after the heart is no longer beating. How the body is treated matters. Silence, gentleness, and ritual care continue to serve the soul as it's gradually loosening its ties to this life. And in honoring the body, we honor the life that has just been lived and quietly support the soul in its final release. And so as the relationship with the body dissolves, the relationship with the soul deepens. When my mom passed just 2 months ago, I felt like I couldn't leave her body. Like I just wanted to be with her body for the longest time. Like they nearly had to kick me out. Because there was something so sacred about just being there and honoring the life that had lived, the life that she had lived. And so it's really important. It's to attend this time carefully and to remember that death unfolds in stages. It's not just body's done breathing. It's not a single moment. It's a gradual and meaningful process of release, of opening, of transformation. So as the soul continues on its journey, the vibration of its parting shapes the realms that open into what follows. So the quality of awareness at the moment of departure, if it's peace or fear, coherence, fragmentation, a drugged stupor, acts as a compass, orienting consciousness towards its next destination. So in many Taoist and Buddhist practices, the soul passes through a 49-day transitional period, during which time consciousness remains responsive, impressionable, and in motion. And during this time, prayers, rituals, remembrance, and the way the body and surrounding space are tended to matter. They support clarity, ease, and a successful passage for the soul on its journey. So for this reason, how we live, how we prepare, and how we accompany one another at death shapes not only the moment of dying, but the journey that unfolds beyond it. And imagine that we can make a difference there. So entering the death canal allows us to discover our deathless, immortal nature. Beyond name and form, it is known as the Tao. It's mysterious in origin, beyond description. Yet it is not unfamiliar. It is the same primordial presence that has carried us through every breath of this life. And all that can be truly said of it is that it can be trusted. It has always been there for you to rely upon. And it is there now. It is home. So journeying through the death canal teaches us how to live with death as an honored and conscious transition. It invites us to move beyond our limited ego and all of its suffering and give ourselves instead to our eternal nature. So the journey, it's both experiential and integrative. That supports deep personal preparation alongside practical professional application. So participants will receive a certificate of completion, as well as an invitation to invite us in our optional immersive retreat held over the Day of the Dead, where these teachings are embodied through experience, ritual, practice, and shared community. So ultimately, this work is about learning how to live and therefore how to die with clarity, reverence, and trust. And it is the most sacred work I've ever known. And it will be an absolute honor to share it with you. It is the most important journey of your life.
And again, thank you to Randine for bringing this up, right? Like, nobody talks about death, or few people do, and to bring that lens of Taoism to it is incredible. And then the question that we had, Randine, is how do we counter the Western medicine mentality of heroic measure and keeping a person alive at all costs?
Oh,
That's an intricate.
that is a very good question. Very good question. One person at a time. And, I had to do that at my mom's death. Like, it was just, we have to advocate when we're there. And this is not, make sure that those that you are working with have a living will, that have filled out their wishes, the things that they want, the things that they don't want. So many hospitals now are becoming large corporations that you oftentimes, like, they wouldn't shut off my mom's pacemaker. The hospital refused. And so it was hospital policy. And there was no way around that. I would have had to have, like, put her in a wheelchair and taken her out myself. So it's very, very difficult, get involved in your local area, try to change local legislation, but much of this is federal legislation. It's the healthcare industry that it milks so much money out of the dying, just keeping them going and not having very beautiful deaths often. So yeah. Most hospital policy is rooted in fear of litigation.
Randine, again, big thank you. This was really interesting work. It's at a perfect time. So many people that have filled out how they work with people in the state of transition, and to be bringing this material to them that are already working in this area. And then for those that are going to come across this and probably get drawn into working to this area. And then for those of us that we know our lives, our numbers of years behind us are more than that are ahead of us. It's nice to have this work as well. So we learn to die before we die, so we can really live. So this has been awesome. Here's another takeaway. Daoist medicine has always concerned itself with movement, how life flows, where it constricts, and how it completes itself. Death is not separate from the movement. I think we can end on that. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful.